Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jeff Garris. I'm the Outreach and Partnerships Director with the Pennsylvanians Together in Action organization, a coalition of organizations coming together across the state to work on really important policy priorities and to get folks to take action. We are really excited today because we have a special lineup of speakers on a very, very timely and important topic, which is the upcoming Supreme Court retention elections. We could actually say, the election is already underway because of the early mail-in voting that folks are doing. We are here today to provide information about what is at stake, what's happening in terms of some of the deception and lies and misinformation that's being circulated to try to confuse people about this election. And we really want to think about how we can together take action in support of the kind of Commonwealth that we'd like to have here in Pennsylvania. This is our Policy Action Zoom meeting. We do these every third Thursday at 1 p.m. for our state policy and action updates. And then on the first Thursday at 1 p.m., my colleague Dwayne Heisler hosts our federal policy action call. We're so glad you're here today. I just want to let folks know, as we usually do, we have all of the lines muted. And if you would like to ask a question, we invite you to type that in the chat. Type it to everyone in the chat, and then I will be going through at the end, helping to field some of these questions and pose them to our panelists. Speaking of our panelists, like I said, we have a great lineup today. We're very excited. We're going to hear first from Mark Steer, who is the executive director here at Pennsylvanians Together in Action. Then we'll be hearing from Susan Gobreski. We're really pleased to have Susan with us. She is the president of the Pennsylvania League of Women Voters. Following Susan, we'll hear from Jillian Kratzer, who is the deputy director at Better Pennsylvania. And we may have one more guest joining us. If we have that guest make it, we will do the introduction then. But that's our lineup today. We are going to be talking about these important Supreme Court retention elections coming up. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, friend, and boss, Mark Steer.
Thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon to everyone. As Jeff said, we're talking about the retention election for members of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. 3 Democrats who sit on that court now are up for retention. And for those of you who don't know, this is what a retention election is. When we elect justices to the Supreme Court, they get a 10-year term. And at the end of 10 years, voters are asked whether we want them to stay on for another 10 years. It's not a competitive election. No one is running against them. It's simply a yes or no vote. Do you want them to continue or not? And if the voters say no, they will leave the court, and then there'll be another election next year to elect new members of the court to replace them. And this has been a system in Pennsylvania for decades. One could make an argument whether it's a good idea or not, but we're stuck with it right now. Typically, these retention elections are sleepy elections. We have them at really for judges at all levels, up from the Supreme Court down to the Court of Common Pleas in our counties. And almost everyone is retained in every single judicial retention election, unless they've had some kind of notorious personal issue. I'm not going to go into the history of that, but those of you who've been in Pennsylvania for a while know that there have been a couple of cases where Supreme Court justices who have been brushed with the tar of corruption or other personal issues have lost a retention election. But typically this is sleepy because people don't pay a lot of attention to these elections, because the justices typically do the job that people want them to do, and that's the end of the matter. This year, things are a little different. There's a major campaign to say no to these justices. The campaign has been spurred on by right-wing advocacy groups, by the Republican Party, and they've been supported by the richest man in Pennsylvania, Jeffrey Yass, a billionaire who has for a long time been the major supporter for Republican candidates for election. Why are they so up in arms? Why do they want to block these 3 Supreme Court justices from being retained? Because the Supreme Court has made a number of critical decisions. They have made those decisions, in our view, following the Constitution and following the law. But sadly, the Constitution and laws of Pennsylvania, like reality itself, has a liberal bias. They've protected the right to vote. the right to use mail-in ballots, the right to cure those ballots if people make mistakes. They protected us from gerrymandered districts in both congressional and U.S. and state House and Senate races. And this may be the thing that most defends the Republicans, because when the Republicans gerrymandered those districts so that in a state that which is evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans, we elected 13 Democratic members of Congress and 5 Republican members of Congress. Um, the Republicans thought that was great. When the Supreme Court said, well, those districts are unconstitutional by Pennsylvania's constitutional standards, and basically created a process that led to redrawing of those district lines, which created a system in which half of the members of Congress are Democrat and roughly half are Republican, which actually does reflect the partisan division in our state. Republicans were very upset about that. The Supreme Court has protected the right to abortion based again on the Constitution of Pennsylvania. And in some important cases, they protected the authority of the governor when Republicans in the House and Senate tried to take actions that would limit the governor's authority. All these things are issues of partisan division. And it's frankly, all these issues are questions that extremists in the Republican Party are concerned about, and they have motivated those extremists and the billionaire Jeffrey Yass to mount this major campaign against retaining these 3 Democratic justices. That's the basic context. It's why we're talking about this issue today, why it's so important to all of us. And I'm going to stop here and turn it over to the next speaker, Susan Gobreski from the League of Women Voters, and other speakers who are going to go into a little bit more detail about all these critical issues and why they're so important to the state and why this election is so incredibly important to the state of Pennsylvania this year and it's to our future. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. My name is Susan Gobreski. I play a couple of roles. I've been involved in nonprofit policy advocacy in Pennsylvania for quite a long time, including on both environment, education, and voting rights issues, which is how I ended up getting involved with the League of Women Voters. Now, the League of Women Voters, I also serve as, by the way, I serve as a senior advisor with Pennsylvania Policy Center, and a role I'm very proud of. And I think the organization does great work on a bunch of critical policies that affect all of us. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. And, some people, there was a time when the League of Women Voters hosted presidential debates, for example. Over the years, as the country has gotten more divided, some people think the League is too nonpartisan and some people think it's too partisan. I am involved in it because I believe that it is important to have a strong movement to help organize women on policy issues that we care about. As some people have said, the League hasn't changed, but politicians' positions have moved. So I'm not here to tell you how to vote, but I am here to say that it's incredibly important that people do vote. These are critical issues. Our courts are extremely important to us. And we actually recently had a press conference because of some concerns, specific concerns about the way that this issue is being campaigned on. Much like Elon Musk and his bazillion dollars going into Wisconsin to try and affect the outcome of the election in Wisconsin. We now have billionaires, one in particular, but people wealthy trying to influence this election, which is their prerogative. Whether or not it's a good idea. We have Citizens United, which has equated money with speech. Which means that people have a lot of flexibility to say what they want with unlimited dollars. That's a problem. One of the things we work on is campaign finance. But importantly, in this election, they actually have put out flyers that have gone to people with misinformation. And so what we think is really important is that voters have high quality information, realistic information, and that we are able to address efforts with misinformation and disinformation efforts. So specifically, a couple of notes. They put out mail that went to a bunch of people in targeted areas across the Commonwealth that suggested that the Supreme Court gerrymandered a map. And what they did is they put out a picture of a map that had some people who followed this issue, there was a joke about it, was called Goofy kicking Donald Duck. And that was the map that the League of Women Voters actually filed lawsuit, and we litigated, complaining that that map was gerrymandered in an unconstitutional way. And that case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent that back to the legislature to redraw the map, which they did not do. The court then appointed a special appointee to draw a map, which resulted in a fairer map that was more representative of Pennsylvania's voters. And so we're concerned about the fact that there has been sort of an effort to tie that gerrymandered map as if the court is responsible for it, when in fact they actually rejected it. They took action. They also have taken action on education, which is a league priority, and voting rights. One of the key issues with voters is that the more people vote, that we should be looking for opportunities to make sure that everyone can cast a ballot if they're an eligible voter, and that we're not creating barriers and challenges to that. So our press conference actually got great coverage, highlighting the fact that there are these concerns about the way that both the campaign finance issue and the information, quote, information is being represented. So we have a couple of voter tools. One of them is called vote411.org, which is a nonpartisan tool where people can look up who's on their ballot. We also, our local leagues, which exist in many places across the Commonwealth, work with local officials to get positions on issues, and those get highlighted at vote411.org so that, again, voters can be informed. Voter participation is incredibly important. And so each of you have an important role to play in reaching out to the people that you know. People are more likely to listen to the people that they know. And so, sorry about him. He's protecting me. So one of the things that you all have a role to play in terms of contacting the people that you know, making sure that they turn out to vote. A lot of people are going to say that they're intending to vote. Other people are going to say that they don't know there's election or who's on it or if it matters or what retention's about. And again, we have a system right now that has us electing judges. I personally, this is a personal opinion, but I'm not inclined to take power away from voters. But there are arguments that people have made about how judges should get there. But as Mark said, right now, this is the system that we have. So helping to make sure that people in your circle understand that there is an important vote, what's at stake, where they can get information, and then helping to remind them to vote. Asking people a couple of questions is always a good strategy when you're asking people to think about participating and voting, offering to get information, and then helping to remind people. And Pennsylvania Policy Center also does have a one-pager on why it's important and what's important about this race. And you're always welcome to check out the League of Women Voters resources on elections. I'm happy to come back if there are questions, but I'll turn it over to my colleague and an amazing woman in many, many capacities in life, Jillian Kratzer.
Hi, thank you, Susan. So I'm Jillian Kratzer, Deputy Director of Better Pennsylvania, and I think everything that Susan and Mark said is so important. The way that voters are being not just misled this year, but actively lied to, is, something that I think across the board, even with registered, no matter your registration, there are a lot of people that feel that are very clear that that's inappropriate. It shouldn't have to be something that we have to say, and yet here we are. And so, again, like Susan said, that's why it's so incredibly important for you to reach out to your circles and talk to the people that you know. Even when it comes to people that you may not usually talk to about politics. I am led to believe that many people have friends that don't think about politics all the time. I don't know what that's like. But it is important, right? And so when you are talking to folks that aren't as plugged in about what's going on and what the big deal is, I think first of all, it is important to point out, right, that 10 years ago, when these judges and justices were elected for the first time, um, people were not remotely as interested in this race. I can tell you as a person that, worked on the front line um, of that election, that it wasn't remotely as big a deal. And now we've come to a place where, for better or worse, mostly worse, it's a very big deal. And it is incredibly important that we pay attention to these races. And so, I think that when you're describing to people what it is that is going on here, it's really, really important to do a couple things. First of all, we want to name who our villain is, right? And that is billionaires, hands down. Um, Jeffrey Yass is nearly single-handedly attempting to buy the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And that cannot be allowed. You can point to the mailers that people have gotten, because people have gotten them, a lot of people. In fact, if you voted by mail-in ballot in a previous year, it is much more, it is very likely you got one of these misleading or straight up lying mailers. The three justices, these current three justices. I do not actually know whether the three justices they replaced were all Republicans. I believe that they were at least partially Republicans, because it was after the 2015 election that, the Democratic justices were in the majority. Not, I want to add that they always vote all together. They don't. And that's another really important thing to point out to folks, and you want to explain the strategy that they're seeing, tell people that they're being misled and they're being lied to, because folks are really getting that from these mailers, because they are so misleading that it's almost very, very obvious in a lot of ways. And, you'll have folks have talked to me about how, they had to really think about this mailer, because they thought, oh, well, I do think term limits are a good idea. And well, this one says that if you support women's rights and children's rights, then I should vote no. And there's so much evidence that, first of all, we know that those are all false. These justices are responsible for making sure that women in Pennsylvania have a right to an abortion. These justices are responsible for moving us in the direction of fair funding for our schools. These justices are responsible for us no longer having a gerrymandered map. And so on every level, they have shown themselves to be fair, to be impartial, and to be strongly for, adjudicating the law in an unbiased way. And I think another thing to point out, and this is actually a really interesting point that Judge Alice Beck-Dubois, who's up for retention for the Superior Court, made the other day. When speaking about the fact that, in Pennsylvania, as Susan mentioned, in Pennsylvania, judges are elected. That's not the case everywhere. And she said that for her, one of the reasons that she feels like it's so good is that it forces judges to go speak to people, to everyday folks that they very likely wouldn't ever see, because most of us don't ever see the inside of a courtroom unless you're, a lawyer, or, in an unfortunate situation that I hope you never are in. And so it puts judges in a position of having to talk to regular people and understand what the concerns of regular Pennsylvanians are. And that's not something that you have to do if you're a judge that's appointed. And, for her, that can lead very much to a situation where people see judges as, above them in a way that's, maybe not very good. And so I think to that end, it's really, really important that we get to see these judges as human beings. And so, when you're talking to voters, that's also important. Um, and yes, as Jack pointed out, in a sense, they are term limited because they have to retire at age 75. Um, I would also add that, when we're talking to people, you know, generally speaking, you want to stay pretty surface level with the information because you don't want to really get into a whole debate about many, many of the finer points. But, it is for sure important to point out, all of the ways in which, these things are misleading. And more importantly, the ways that these justices have proven time and time and time again that they are there to serve the people of Pennsylvania. I see JJ's here, Jeff. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, just hey, if you're wrapping up, that's fine, Jillian. If you have anything you want to add, that's great too.
No, I may later at the end, but no.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jillian. And I should mention to folks, we noted that this is co-sponsored today by the Pennsylvanians Together in Action Coalition. Better PA, which is where Jillian is the deputy director, is one of our important partner organizations. I'm really pleased that we have our fourth speaker here with us in the room now, who is also, their organization is also part of the work that we do. Really pleased to have as a colleague and a friend, the executive director of Commonwealth Communications, JJ Abbott. JJ.
Thanks so much. And so apologies to everyone. I thought I just messed this one up in my calendar. So apologies to Jeff in particular, who does a great job. I know a lot has been covered by the other speakers, all of which I am big fans. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about like some tools that folks can have access to in order to be able to inform their friends and neighbors about this race. The first that I want to drop into the chat is a voter guide that features all the statewide judicial elections that are on the ballot this year. This is just a really convenient, easy link for folks to be able to use to spread the word. I think the overwhelming takeaway that I have from working on this election over the last few months is that we still have such an incredible amount of people who are likely to vote that are still undecided or don't feel that they have enough information yet to make a decision about this retention race. It is because it is so unique and quirky and weird and just not something that people are super familiar with. But it's actually probably the easiest election that anyone gets to vote in because they don't have to decide between two people. They just have to read up and make an informed decision about whether to select yes or no. And so Pennsylvania Decides is a project that we worked on with another partner to be able to provide a really good amount of background and on important issues that are important when it comes to our courts and to people's lives, to be able to get as many folks as possible to feel more confident about why they should get out and vote in this election, and then how important it is for us to try to protect our courts from the bad guys that are out there that I know Jillian talked about, trying to corrupt our courts that will favor in a way that favors them. And so I think information is really powerful here. People are getting a lot of really basic but crappy misinformation and with mailers. But I think for the average person who takes a little bit of time to read through this voter guide, they'll get a better sense of what's really at stake in this election and the just the amazing track record that these justices have of being fair and independent, but most importantly, standing up for the people. I think one thing that I would really try to think about as you're communicating with people about this race is that no is something that doesn't have a name attached to it, doesn't have a party attached to it in people's mind. It's just an option on a ballot. So what we have to do is be able to really communicate to people what that means. And there's a couple of different things that I think are important. One is we can talk to people about who's behind no and who's behind these mailers that are pushing no. And we know who that is. It's a network of interest groups that are conservative, that are right wing, that are funded by Pennsylvania's richest man to really undermine the very things that people in Pennsylvania care about, things like public schools and unions and representative democracy and a fair tax system. And these are things that people really care about. And so if people better understand that the reasons why people are funding these campaigns to vote no, they can have a better sense of the choice that they're making between yes and no. And yes is for maintaining our fair and an independent court, and no is taking a massive risk and creating a lot of chaos in the process, that the same people who screwed up our courts and our government at the national level are going to get the power and ability to do that here in our highest courts here in Pennsylvania. The other thing I would say about no, for people that you're talking to who might be getting this, is to really try to raise the stakes on what could happen if the court were to be conservative or controlled by Republicans in the future. I think it's really important that people understand what conservative courts mean. And I think we have a glaring example of that in Washington right now. And people are fundamentally deeply disturbed. And it's not just, it's a host of issues that are important to us, like fair representation. We're all hearing right now about redistricting. I know you've heard about that on this call already, but the U.S. Supreme Court is full of judges who want to give politicians the power to be able to pick who gets a say and who represents them, instead of voters picking which politicians they want. And we've seen them take away people's fundamental rights and freedoms, not just abortion rights, but also attacking the right to organize and undermining it, the right to clean air and clean water, and giving corporations more power to be able to pollute without consequences. And frankly, they've given these conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court have also really undermined the rule of law. And they've given this president a reckless amount of ability and authority to be able to do whatever he wants without consequence. And frankly, why would we want a court like that in Pennsylvania? Instead, what we can have is our last line of defense against that very overreach that we're seeing in Washington and so many people are uncomfortable with. We have right now a bulwark against that. We have a Supreme Court that stood up against the same people in Washington that were trying to throw out people's ballots going all the way back to 2020. They stood up to politicians to throw out maps that were rigged to help one party, but we're a product of bipartisan collusion by elected officials to put in place to protect incumbents. You hear a lot of things about how these judges are partisan, but a lot of their decisions have actually gone against politicians in both parties who are trying to take advantage of the system. And lastly, they have stood up for our rights. That's so important, and people really care deeply about that. Whether it is the right to organize, whether the right to hold your employer accountable, Pennsylvanians have unique rights in our Constitution to clean air and clean water and fairly funded public schools. These justices, this majority over the last 10 years has represented a seismic shift in our rights actually being protected. And you'll hear this from the other side about legislating from the bench and blah, blah, blah. But all they're saying is that these justices are ruling in a direction that they don't like, that the politicians and the powerful are uncomfortable with, because it overwhelmingly favors the people, our rights, and our freedoms. And so there's a great case to make to people that are undecided. But the last thing I'm going to say is that it's not just about people who are undecided. There are a lot of people in your world that are either not going to vote this election because it's not as relevant to them as other elections for Congress or president or governor. And then there's a lot of people that are going to vote who may not even know that this election's happening at all, and they may just skip over it on their ballot. And so in order for us to have the highest participation in these elections possible, it's just really important that we're leveraging our relationships to talk to people we know about it. And so whether it's sharing resources from Pennsylvanians Together, sharing the voter guide, sharing an article or a piece of content that you see online, don't just share it to the same people who see your Facebook feed over and over. Share it into your group chats, your family group chats, your neighborhood group chats, your kids' schools group chats. Try to find ways to reach people who might not being reached online or in advertising, and just make sure they know this election's happening. And it's really important that we're, trying in this last less than 3 weeks just to make sure we're doing those checks with people we know to make sure they're ready to vote and they have a plan to vote and they understand how important these retention elections are. Because this is going to be my last point, is that one thing to keep in mind too is these are not the top of the ballot. And you may have heard this already a little bit, but it's really important that we're reminding people and asking them to find this on their ballot, because we know that that they're not going to be at the top. And so they're either going to be towards the bottom of their ballot or they're going to be on the back side. And so we want to remind people to fill their whole ballot out, to flip it over, to check to make sure that they've voted in these retention elections. And so really, really grateful for everyone on this call and to Pennsylvanians Together for getting everyone together.
Thank you so much, JJ. Sorry, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I just want to say two other quick things. You may have followed the news yesterday that the Supreme Court is actually considering, heard a case about the Voting Rights Act and may overturn the parts of the Voting Rights Act that would address minority districts and how minorities, how people of color are handled, which could potentially relegate people of color to having no votes. They do that either through compacting a bunch of people into one district, or by spreading them out over so many districts when people have done redistricting. So that's an important thing. And as the Supreme Court has made decisions that are more questionable to some of us around like Dobbs and looking at voting rights, state courts are going to be incredibly important. And the other thing is that people have an inclination to try and interpret the partisanship of the judges, but ultimately what we should be looking for are justices that follow the law. And so I think that one of the things you want to look at is, do you believe that our justices interpreted, for example, the state provision that we should provide a thorough and efficient education for all? What were their decisions based on following the law? And they're being characterized as trying to be sort of partisan and sort of legislating from the bench, when in fact what they did is interpret the law. And as people have noted, that their decisions didn't always go one way. So part of what we want are justices who are there to help interpret the law and make sure ultimately that it is fair, not to put their fingers on the scale.
Thanks, Susan. And again, thank you, JJ. JJ mentioned the idea that folks should be sharing information with others, people that they know, the kind of folks who may not be in this kind of middle of the day meeting to discuss state policy issues. I will note that in the chat, we have had a number of our presenters share some information there. There's some great links to resources. Please take a look at that and feel free to share those with people outside of this network of folks. From those questions we're taking in the chat, I want to note that we got some really interesting discussions, some questions. I'm going to pose as many of them as I can to our presenters. One thing that I want to note is that Mindy noted that I had to be informed by WHYY via Instagram that there was possible misinformation in the paper mail I received. Scary. And that takes us to one of the questions that we got early in the discussion in the chat from Jennifer, who asked, can we litigate against Jeffrey Yaffe for his totally intentional disinformation campaign regarding term limits, keeping children safe, etc.? It's 100% election interference. I'm going to open that up to any of our presenters, JJ, Jillian, Susan, Mark, your thoughts on if it's possible to actually challenge this in court, what he's done and doing.
Sadly, well, not sadly. We have a First Amendment. People have a right to say things even if they're untrue. And this is not the first example of a Republican or Republican-leaning advocate saying things that are untrue. The best response to lies like Yas is telling is for all of us to tell the truth and do it as much as we can with our friends, with our neighbors, online. There are efforts to knock on doors all over the state, being led by progressive advocacy groups and Democrats. See if you can find those efforts. We can help you do so if you want. Join them. Keep knocking on doors. Tell people the truth. Um, that's the response to lies. Our efforts.
Thanks, Mark. Unless one of our other presenters wants to chime in on that, we do have a couple other questions. A related one from Michael. Michael asks, is the Democratic response to the Yas disinformation campaign making a difference? For any of our presenters. JJ, thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the difference that it's making is that it's activating a lot of people, like the folks on this call, to get engaged in this election. And so there's no way for us to know whether they're working to trick people into voting. No, I don't think that is likely the case. I think those sort of tactics don't work as well as the people who think they do do. So I would just say I think what this is an opportunity to do a couple of things with your friends and your families. One, to use those mailers as an opportunity to to educate people about the race. You know, people don't like getting tricked. They don't like getting scammed. They're looking for good information to counter the bad information that's out there. And so I shared an article in the chat. I also think this voter guide is really helpful to be able to let people know. But you can be very direct that these justices are were elected as Democrats. They have been fair and impartial, and that voting yes is the way to protect our rights and freedoms. And you can use the bad guys as a way to start that conversation with more people. I think the other thing that I would say that's important, you know, encountering those mailers is not to really like try to debunk them. I wouldn't get into a debate with your friends about term limits. Not an issue that's strongest in our favor. I think what you want to do is try to be able to pivot people to think about the other things that are at stake and the consequences of putting those things at risk. And that's our rights, that's our freedoms, that's fairness in our courts, that's the rule of law and due process, things that a lot of people are really concerned about in the country right now. But we have an opportunity to protect those things here at home. So, but I will say this, like, we've seen a lot of activity from people who have gotten these mailers, who are getting inspired to talk to their friends and neighbors about the truth, to get engaged around these campaigns. And so that's what we really need more than anything right now, is people talking to people that they know, to people that they have relationships with, or that they have something in common with, and get the word out about what this election's really about. I wouldn't worry yourself with, is this working or not? I would say, what am I doing to counter it? And what you can do is talk to your friends and your neighbors and your networks.
Thanks, JJ. You mentioned the mailers that folks are getting, and one of our friends here in the chat, Michael H., noted that in my mailbox, the flyers saying vote no are outnumbering the ones for yes 2-1. And another Michael, this is Michael P., had a question that says, what concrete steps are Democrats and progressive groups taking to get voters who are not online? And again, I'll open that up for any of our panelists.
So that's why knocking doors and making phone calls is so incredibly important right now, because it is the best way to target the voters that we need to talk to. You know, because so for one, right, a large part of this is making sure that people turn out this year. You know, I mean, I think in particular, Democrats, generally speaking, are the easiest in that respect, because, you know, they're largely predisposed to vote yes for these judges. But, you know, it is an odd-numbered election year. And unfortunately, turnout is very, very bad in an odd-numbered election year. And interestingly, turnout is usually the worst the year after a presidential year in a 4-year cycle. So we have a lot of really important work to do there. So it is a lot of door knocking, which is absolutely happening. There's a lot of phone banking, which is also happening. And, those are the top two ways to do it. And I will say this, yes, Jeffrey Yass and the Commonwealth Foundation are spending absolutely ungodly amounts of money on these mailers. But sometimes more is just more. It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean good things for them. So, I think that it's important for us to, and even frame it for people that you're talking to, like, look at this ridiculous stack of mailers that I got. Why, there's nothing in here that makes me want to vote no for these people. Like, here's why I'm voting yes. Use it to your advantage.
I couldn't agree more. I just want to clarify real quick from what I said in the chat, which is folks should not think that this is happening in a vacuum. There is a very big effort on the yes side that includes the justices themselves and a coordinated committee that's talking to voters for them, and then a bunch of groups that are aligned around getting folks to vote yes. And so, like, you're not alone out there. There is a lot of activity. It may not be as much on the mailers, but in terms of when you look in terms of television and radio and digital advertisements, that the folks that are supporting the justices and supporting retention are actually spending much more than on some of those other mediums. And so I get the mailers are just like they're physical, so you get them and it feels like it's overwhelming and they're sending them. But let's just be clear, part of that's part of their plan, right? They want to sort of demoralize us. They want us to think that we're hopeless so that we don't do the work that we know we can and we need to do in order to win. And so I just wouldn't be demoralized by the mailers. They're clearly doing what they think they need to do in order to try to, get to a no coalition. But there's a lot of work that's being done from folks in the grassroots that are knocking doors, making phone calls, sending text messages, to advertising that's happening in order to talk to people about what's really at stake in this election and why it's important to vote yes.
Mark?
So can I just ask anyone who's received a mailer sponsored by Yes or others to vote no, just raise your hand or use the little thing to
Maybe give the thumbs up icon if you're not on camera.
icon with a bunch of them. Okay. I've gotten, I kind of lost count. I think I've gotten like 27 in my Philly address. How many of you are regular Republican voters or inclined to be Republican voters? I haven't seen a lot fewer hands. I'm not worried when I see 30 mailers come to my address in Philly because they're just wasting our time. Not only wasting their time targeting me, they're wasting their time targeting my division. My division has the highest Democratic turnout, third highest Democratic turnout, and the first highest Democratic percentage support in the entire city of Philadelphia. Let them spend their money and send it to us. It's a waste of money. If they were running a really brilliant campaign, most of us wouldn't be hearing about it. They'd be targeting people who are likely to be swing voters. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. JJ's right. This is all about trying to discourage us. Don't get discouraged. Gut out, do the work, and this election is going to come out the right way.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jillian. Thank you also, JJ, for responding to that. In response to Michael P's question in the chat about concrete steps progressive groups are taking to get voters who are not online, Rachel shared that the Pennsylvania Alliance for Retired Americans is partnering with the PA AFL-CIO to phone bank senior union voters about this election, and Rachel provided the link for folks who want to sign up for that. I am looking at the questions. Maureen had the question about, do speakers know if any organization is doing their own mailer? Jillian mentioned that. Some others talked about that as well. One question we have from Jack is that the question is, what steps did Wisconsin Democrats take to overcome the Musk money there? Do any of those steps make sense here? again, I'll open that up for any of our panelists.
I mean,
They
yeah,
did
I
over-
don't know. I don't have an intense level of knowledge of exactly what they did, but I do know that they had a lot of people on the ground. Not to beat my favorite dead horse, but knocking doors. But they also focused very strongly on the fact that this is a bunch of billionaires trying to buy their courts. So, there's a lot of overlap, I think, with what we're doing here.
JJ, Susan, did you want to chime in on that at all about the Wisconsin question?
So I know someone who was helping run that campaign. They did what we're doing. There was an intense social media campaign, television advertising campaign, and there was a lot of door knocking. Uh, the more we need to do, the more of that work we do, the more we explain what this election's about, the better things are going to go. And I'm seeing some people say, yeah, there's people have been confused by the mailers. Keep in mind those mailers came out really early, and generally that's not a good strategy. The reason they came out early is because the Republicans are going to try to confuse people. Um, our stuff's coming out now when people are paying a lot more attention to the election, and our stuff saying is refuting those mailers and telling people what the election's about. I just don't think that many likely voters are going to be all that confused when it comes to election day. People know which side is which. And of course, if you're worried about that happening, go knock on some doors. Make sure people do know which side is which.
Speaking of knocking on doors, we have a note in the chat here from our friend and colleague at Action Together Northeast PA. They do fantastic work on the ground in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania. From Jess, Jess notes that Action Together Northeast PA is knocking on doors and making calls to voters as this call is happening. The conversations with real people about the stakes of this election make a huge difference. I would encourage folks who are interested in connecting with the folks in Action Together Northeast PA to go to their website, reach out to them if you'd like to help out with that. Or Jess, if you want to drop some information for folks to get in touch in the chat, you can do that as well. Looking at another question we have here from Jack, and this one I think JJ is a bit more directed to you, which is, what is Jeff Yass's Project 2025 for our state? I think we may have lost JJ. That's also a little bit bigger question there involving Project 2025. Jeff Yass has been putting money into undermining candidates across the aisle. He has fought to get rid of moderate Republicans, but replacing them with white Christian nationalists. He has worked very hard to undermine public education. It's kind of like if there's anything awful, evil, rotten, Jeff Yass is probably funding it. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeff just said what I was going to say. It's Jeff Yass is the biggest proponent of vouchers, the biggest opponent of public education in the state. He's the biggest opponent of a fair tax system. As we move in the next couple of years, and there's going to be a big debate and discussion about how we tax and who we tax in Pennsylvania, he is going to be the one standing against the policies that we actually need to tax the rich people in Pennsylvania and tax corporations so that we can continue to fund our budget. So those two things, taxation and public education, he's the devil.
Jillian, I'll also note that in the chat there was a specific question for you about connecting with the group that's doing some work on the ground, I think in your part of the state. So if you want to respond to that in the chat, I just wanted to flag that one as well.
Okey-doke.
All right. Looking to see if we have any additional questions coming in from folks. I will note that Jess, our friend at Action Together Northeast PA, dropped some information in the chat there about how folks can connect with the community canvas in that part of the state, and some information about how to reach out and how to get involved and assist in that effort. Jillian, you have anything you want to add?
No, I think just everybody covered so much of it, and just that this is, I know that it is exhausting for everybody to have every single election every single year be the most important election of our entire existences. But we probably have some more some more of that ahead of us until, we get to a country that is perhaps stable again. And in the meantime, make sure you're out there doing the work. Make sure you're out there taking care of yourself too. This is incredibly important.
Mark, Susan, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to add to what Jillian said? And Jillian did drop that information in the chat so folks can connect with her.
No, I think we're
All right.
Let's go out in March.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you so much to Susan Gobreski from the Pennsylvania League of Women Voters, Jillian Kratzer with Better Pennsylvania, JJ Abbott from Commonwealth Communications, and also to our Executive Director with Pennsylvanians Together in Action, Mark Steer. Thank you so much to all of you for taking the time, for helping to really educate folks and give information that folks can in turn share with people that they know, ways that they can get involved. That's kind of what we try to do here with these policy action calls. We want to talk about policy, but we also want to talk about ways that folks can take action. And I want to thank all of the organizations in Pennsylvanians Together in Action, that great coalition, for all the tremendous work that folks are doing, not just on this, Supreme Court retention election, but on so many issues that affect Pennsylvanians in every corner of the Commonwealth. Thank you to all of you for joining us here today. Again, feel free to join us every third Thursday at 1 p.m. when we talk about state policy issues, and also join us for our federal policy action calls, which are on the first Thursday of every month at 1 p.m. That next one will be coming up on Thursday, November 6th. So we will be getting out information to you about that. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Take care.